Good morning. Your meeting is now live.
Good morning and welcome to the Primary Care Commissioning Committee meeting. I'm Margaret Gailey, lay member, and I will be chairing the meeting today. We are meeting virtually in response to the limitations placed on governments by the COVID-19 pandemic. Members of the public have been invited to view this meeting via a link available from the NHS Portsmouth Clinical Commissioning Group website, and papers for the meeting are also available via this website. Today's meeting is being recorded, so that in the event of a failure of technology, it can continue and will then be uploaded onto the NHS Portsmouth Clinical Commissioning Group website as soon as possible. Committee members and attendees are requested to keep their microphones on mute and only to turn them on when they are called to speak. Please use a raised hand to indicate that you wish to speak. Please, can I ask everyone taking part today to confirm that they are present? I'll call your name, and can you turn on your microphone and give your name and title? So, Jason Eastman.
Good morning, Jason Eastman, Associate Director of IMT.
Mark Compton.
Morning all, Mark Compton, Director of Transformation.
Simon Cooper.
Simon Cooper, Director of Medicines Optimisation and Interim Director of Primary Care.
Julia O'Mara.
Good morning, Margaret. Julia O'Mara, Practice Nurse Advisor, Portsmouth CCG.
Jackie Powell.
Morning all, Jackie Powell, lay member, Portsmouth CCG.
David Scarborough.
Good morning, David Scarborough. I'm the Practice Manager Representative for the CCG.
Michelle Spandley.
Hello, I'm Michelle Spandley. I'm the Chief Finance Officer for the CCG.
Dr. Claire Sieber.
Morning everyone, Claire Sieber, Medical Director at Wessex LMCs and a GP in West Sussex.
Jo York.
Good morning, I'm Jo York, Deputy Chief Officer for Health and Care Portsmouth, Portsmouth CCG and the City Council.
Roger Batterbury.
Hello Margaret, it's Roger Batterbury, Chairperson, Health Watch Portsmouth.
Nicola Burnett.
Good morning, so Nicola Burnett, I'm the Deputy Chief Finance Officer for the CCG.
Jo Hanswensi.
Good morning, Jo Hanswenzel. I'm the NHS England attendee and I'm a Primary Care Commissioning Manager.
Lisa Harding. Is Lisa on? Justina Jeffs.
Good morning, Margaret. Justina Jeffs, Head of Governance.
Steve McInnes.
Morning, Steve McInnes, Head of Primary Care Commissioning.
Stephen Arobia.
Hi there, Stephen Arobio, Clinical Quality Manager for the CCG.
And Lisa Stray.
Lisa Stray, Executive Assistant for Business Services.
So, welcome everyone. We have received apologies from Dr. Nick Moore, Dr. Helen Atkinson, Sylvia Macy, Christine Horan, and Andy Sylvester and Rebecca Spandley. So we then move to register of interests. Is there any extra interest to be added today? Any amendments to be made? I'll take silence as no. And are there any interests to be declared? Any conflicts of interest to be declared? No? Okay. Can we then move to the minutes of the last meeting and just check through for accuracy? Page 1. Page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5, page 6, and page 7. I think there are 2 actions arising. Justina, you've added Dr. Nick Moore.
I have indeed.
Yes. And Jason, there was an action around the digital primary care roadmap.
There was. I have transmitted back to regional team, but I'm yet to be told about or confirmed if there is going to be a national campaign about what we're going to deliver in the next 2 years. So if we can keep it open, and then I will chase next month.
And Jason, I understand you might have any other business?
I do in the confidential part of the meeting, if that's okay.
Okay. There's a risk register then. Can we move to that? Steve, do you want to take us through that? Do you want us to highlight any risks in that?
Yeah, thanks, Mara. I've just switched my camera off because I'm getting lots of messages around poor connection, so apologies for that. But in terms of the primary care risk register, we've not had a great deal of time to review this over the last few weeks, but it looks to be fairly up to date and accurate, I would say. We probably need to just update and refresh the one around COVID, particularly with there's some additional mitigation we can probably put in that one. But overall, it looks to be fairly up to date. So what I would suggest is, if any members have any questions or comments they want to make, we can hear from them now, or by all means contact me outside of the meeting, and then our team will do a thorough review of the register again over the next couple of weeks, and we'll report back any changes next month.
Margaret, I think
Margaret,
you're
on
on mute.
mute.
Any questions or comments? Sorry, I will try to remember to do that. Jill.
Sorry, I thought Jackie had her hand up first, but it was just a comment. I think, absolutely recognise the time constraints and we'll link back with Steve, but I think we probably need to just update the register in light of the PCN developments and primary care networks, and also some of the changes to the DES funding, how that might impact on our integrated primary care services as well. So I get that this is mainly around practice-based primary care, but we probably need to add some of those components around primary care networks and the Portsmouth Primary Care Alliance as well. But I can work with Steve and the team to do that.
Simon, your hand up?
Yeah, just an observation regarding the COVID element on there. Just the COVID picture is changing pretty much on an hourly, if not daily, basis ongoing. So that will be, as Steve said, we will update that as part of the team and review it where it is, but it will be a continually changing picture, I suspect, over the next series of months until we know. So at any point it is likely to be behind, so we will chase as best we can, but it won't be a perfectly accurate picture.
Any other comments? Jackie.
Oh, sorry. I think possibly linked to what Simon just said, the transition of PCSE services has been on here a long time, and I'm imagining that actually I'm hoping things either got a lot better, especially with COVID, where I'm hoping people are getting promptly paid for their services, or is it still at 12 from a risk of 16? That's the question.
Yeah, that's it's a good question to ask, Jackie, and it's something we probably could go out to all our practices just to get a bit of feedback. And I wonder whether Dave has got any. Yeah, Dave's got his hand up actually. Whether Dave's got any current feedback.
Yeah, pass his hand up.
Yes, I did put. Thanks, Steve. I did put my hand up in response to Jackie's comment. I certainly, from my perspective in a practice, and I'm relatively confident that my colleagues would agree, is that the service provided by PCSE has not improved particularly, and they continue to create difficulties around payments even in this time of COVID. I'm not going to drag out the detail here. It's a blanket statement, and I think it would be a good idea for the primary care team to ask for feedback on that. certainly my own experience, I've recently used the LMC to help me escalate some queries, which have taken over 6 months to get a response to. And I think we could probably leave it at that, but it's not an improving picture.
Okay, so it stays at 12, if not higher, and there's something when it's possible for the primary care team to go out and see what the picture is, get feedback. Just because I'm thinking this payment in time of crisis, you need the flow of money, I suspect.
Yeah, we certainly could do that over the next couple of weeks, Jackie, and then we'll probably need to liaise with NHS England on this as well, because they commission Primary Care Support England, so we need to sort of go through that route and see what we can do.
Just to add to that, Jackie, it's not just about payment; it's about inaccuracies, which take up a lot of time. It's the queries and inaccuracies, so particularly around things like pension deductions, that can be particularly time-consuming.
Thank you. I'm sort of asked.
Thank you. Have a hand up from Joe. Joe? Josephine?
I'd just like to say, if you can give me details of these complaints, and I will escalate it. It's really useful to know, particularly about the pensions issues, but anything else, and if you have a complaint number as well, then I will escalate those questions to our heads of primary care.
Joe, I'll email you separately outside of this meeting with the details. Well, a synopsis of what I've had to recently deal with them.
That would be really helpful. Thanks, Dave.
Any other comments, questions? No, so I think we've agreed there needs to be some updating, and Joe's going to take some of the issues that have been raised around payments, etc., back to see if those can be resolved more quickly. Okay. Is that fair enough? People happy with that position? Dave, you've got your hand up still, is that?
Sorry, legacy hand.
Okay. Thank you. Can we then move to primary care finance summary, which is Nikki?
Yeah, of course. So what we've got presented to you here is the month 7 finance report. So I think Becky explained at the last meeting that from between month 1 to 6 to month 7 to 12, we've had a change in the financial regime. So we've moved from a retrospective allocation process back to a more traditional prospective allocation process. So we're now clear on the volume of funding that we've got to work with across primary care for months 7 to 12. And the report should look more familiar to you in terms of in prior years gone, how we would have reported that position. Across the majority of areas, we are seeing expenditure in line with the budgets that have been set. And these budgets have been made to reflect where possible, within the CCG board signed off back in March of this year. The area where we're seeing significant underspends in the year-to-date position is through the ARRS roles. So we are working with primary care at the moment to look at how we can utilise that funding in the year to help support the resilience and sustainability of primary care over supporting the rollout of vaccinations if required, supporting on long COVID, and just generally getting primary care back up to capacity as we'd expect. We are anticipating that we do utilise that monies in full still through the forecast outturn. However, that is a potential risk that we need to work with PCNs on around making sure that we do make best use of those monies. Other areas just to note that are excluded from this position is we are reporting net of any COVID-19 claims that we've had through practices. So year to date, we have reimbursed primary care just over £500,000 in relation to COVID-19 claims. Now, we're not expecting that number to increase significantly now, to the end of the year, because the majority of those schemes ended in August of this year. And just to note as well, there was a sort of highly publicised announcement of £150 million being made available to primary care. That's also excluded from this position at the moment, because it's not funding we've physically received as of yet. We are expecting that to equate to around £500,000 for Portsmouth, and there's 7 key priorities that we're anticipating to spend that against, and really that involves supporting the rollout of COVID at home support services, and building back up the resilience of primary care, and supporting practices with backfill on an exceptions basis where sickness rates put our service sustainability at risk. I think they're the highlights in terms of where we are. We are maintaining the position in terms of trying to protect practice cash flows and income wherever possible, and to ensure that people can get regular cash flows as they would have anticipated, to support wherever we can. I don't know if anybody has any specific questions on any of the information contained in the report.
Any questions? Dave?
It's just a comment, really, and it's very much in line with what I said at CCT board about the ARRS scheme. I certainly acknowledge what the CCG are trying to do to enable us to make most use of, or maximum use of, that funding, but it comes down to the basic point: is the scheme's lack of flexibility in terms of what manpower you can use that funding against, that is stopping practices. And from a personal point of view, I can't see how we can maximise that use of that budget with the scheme as it is at the moment. Now, I know there's been some indications that we can use PCN staff to deliver the COVID vaccine, which may use up some of the surplus funding. However, we can't use other practice staff for that for that funding. Now, if we could do that, then that would be very, very useful, but the scheme just doesn't allow it at the moment.
Any response to that? Any way of amending it?
I think, Margaret, just to reflect that we recognise, and through the PCN support networks, it's widely recognised that the lack of flexibility is feeling quite restrictive at the moment. Last financial year, we did see some minor amendments made through the national team to try and recognise some of that. However, those amendments were modest at best, and I think that's what we're seeing this year as well, that we're seeing modest tweaks in the guidance that allow us slight flexibilities. But yes, it is still quite a stringent set of guidance around what exactly these roles can be used for. And of course, as they're staffing, it's very hard once you've built up an underspend to actually utilise that, because in the next financial year, overstaffing in one year just becomes financially unsustainable. So it is a very tricky area.
Okay. Noted. Jackie?
My question was very much linked to what we're talking about. I didn't know what ARRS stood for. I'm kind of piecing the bits of the puzzle together. So could someone just explain what that is? And is there any way for us to feed back to, I don't know, NHS England or NHSI about how restrictive this, whatever it is, can be? Or is it that we need to be changing at pace to fit whatever model is being suggested?
So, Jack, if I can pick that one up, I'll take my hand down. This was the point I was going to say. So that has been discussed across the system with the other heads of primary care across Hampshire and Isle of Wight, and it is widely recognised that the stringency to that budget is going to be challenging in terms of using it elsewhere. So the ARRS is the additional roles funding scheme. So this is for a particular interest of mine, obviously, is for bringing pharmacists and social prescribers, etc., into practices to start to work in those new innovative roles. So my understanding is that that was why it was intentionally set up to be restrictive, because it wanted to promote those new roles. Now, obviously, when that was set up, we weren't in this space. And we are now finding ourselves with, as we've discussed, a pot of money that is at a very high level intended to support practices' workload and new ways of working. But the new ways of working that we find ourselves in is dealing with a pandemic, and subsequently we are struggling to move that money into the right place to do it. So we acknowledge that across the whole of Hampshire and Isle of Wight, and we have flagged that back up through that system as best we can. To say just a little bit more leniency around this, or some reinterpretation of that, would be supportive of getting us through the situation we're in at the minute. Because it would be incredibly frustrating to sit here with a large chunk of money underspent at the end of the year and struggling to actually meet the demands of the patients that are out there.
Yes, exactly. Thank you.
Just to add to that, Simon, I think you just summarised it really well, actually, of where we are at the moment, and it's good to hear that there is feedback going back at the system for that money.
Okay, so it sounds like we can do very little else other than the kind of feedback that we're currently giving about the flexibility of the money that's available. Mark, did you want to say something?
Yeah, thank you. I was just going to ask, as obviously we've got quite a large underspend against ARRS at the moment. There have been some issues with MSK in particular and first contact physiotherapists, in the sense that largely we've had an agreement with Solent around utilising some of their physios for PCNs. We've struggled throughout the year to formalise those agreements because NHS England didn't have a standard subcontracting template or document, so we've actually had to source one locally. I was just going to inquire, though, in terms of that underspend, as I think we're getting to a position now where we're having formal contracts signed. There's probably recognition that that service has been going on for a number of months now, and therefore some funding will need to flow to PCNs and then to Solent for that service. I just didn't know whether this underspent kind of accounted for that kind of backdating of the service and the money flowing to them, or whether it does account for that. Just try to get an understanding of the size of that underspend.
So, sorry, Mark, I think what you're asking is there a provision in there for transferring some of the ARRS funding to Solent to provide a service to PCNs? Is that the question?
Yes, so I think technically it would go to PCNs, wouldn't it, who would then pass it on to Solent, but it was just wondering whether that's been accounted for in what the figures that we're seeing at the moment, or whether that's still to come out.
So everything that has been informed to the team at the moment is accounted for in there. One of the reasons why we're seeing such a large underspend there is that there was a second wave of money announced nationally. So there was the budget that we set locally, plus then they increased the value of the scheme nationally. So there's an additional value of income that we can also claim from the national team. So we've got a bit of a double whammy, that we weren't spending the original sum to the maximum. Then they expanded the scheme within this financial year to a level that goes beyond what we already had the capability to recruit to, which is what's really driving it to look quite so large at the moment.
Steve, you have a question, comment?
Yes, just to say that PCNs have until the end of November to submit a final version of their workforce plans. I know that those plans do include an element relating to MSK, but we can double check that offline and just see whether that includes the backdated element, and happy to work with you on that, Mark.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Does seem a bit crazy, doesn't it? There's no way that that money can be held until it is a more appropriate time to use it, or to allow for schemes to catch up. I'm guessing not. I just returned to my rainbows and unicorns. Well,
Okay. I take silence as there isn't, unless Nikki corrects me. Okay.
No, and Jackie, it's really around the national team, and we locally actually really support this as a scheme. So the reason why they don't want the funding diverted, as Simon said, is because it really is a national priority, that this is the direction of travel. And despite the pandemic, they're really just trying to incentivise us to continue with the strategy. So, you know, whilst it does seem bonkers at times, there are also very logical reasons why the national team are safeguarding this money and really putting those restraints there to try and drive us into the direction of the intended strategy.
which would be lovely if it probably does make sense, but if there's no way of catching that up to be able to utilise that funding, it just seems a shame.
Okay. Any other comments or questions on finance? So, no. Take silence as no. And then move to Chair's action. And Chair's action relates to GP who resigned from Portsmouth GP practice on the 28th of September, and also to Mark Stubbings, who was the managing direct partner at Portsmouth, also left on the 31st of October and was replaced by Dr. Karen Kidd. Any questions about the Chair's actions and comments? No? I'm taking some. Steve, do you want to comment?
Yes, thanks, Margaret. Yeah, just to confirm really that Mark Stubbings was not in a clinical role, so he was in a business partner type role. So there were no concerns around replacing clinical time there. And for Dr. Chapier, he did various work outside of the practice, so they didn't have lots of sessions to cover off, and the practice have advised they've done that through, or are planning to do that through increasing some salaried roles. So I think for the committee, in terms of approving these contract variations for people to come off the contract, hopefully you've got assurance that the practice certainly has no issues around sustainability and resilience in this regard. And what I would just say is we just have a bit of an ongoing debate or a query around the actual dates of leaving the contract. So what I propose, if this is okay, is if the committee is happy to sign off on these two people coming off the contract, but we don't specify in the minutes the actual dates of that, and we deal with that in the background, if that's okay.
So are the committee happy to take that course of action? Can I just see? Yeah. Okay. Any dissent? No. Okay. Can we then take that as approved? Thank you. Can I move to flu and COVID vaccination programmes? And that's a verbal update from Steve.
Thank you. Yes, you probably recall at the last meeting I set out all the requirements for the flu programme for this year, and we talked in a bit of detail around that. So this is just a very brief update on how things are going, and perhaps at a later date I can share a more formal report with some data, but I can certainly talk you through the current or the latest position on things. So for Portsmouth, overall our uptake is looking pretty good at this stage. So if I take you through for the 2 and 3 year olds, we're at 49% uptake, which is 6 or 7% below the Hampshire Isle of Wight average, admittedly. So that, I'm sure everyone would like to see some further work on this. But having said that, if we compare with our best comparator for these sort of things, which is a city not too far away, then we are a few percentage points above their uptake. So pretty positive overall, and we know practices are working really hard on getting those youngsters in for their vaccinations. In terms of the over 65s, we've hit our 75% target, which is the first time for as long as I can remember, really, to be honest. So I think it's a combination of lots more patients coming forward and practices really putting in a lot of extra work and a lot of extra resources, being innovative where they can, doing things a bit differently. So I think to hit 75% at this stage already is a fantastic achievement. Not all CCGs in Hampshire Isle of Wight have managed to achieve that yet, so I think that really is a credit to all our local practices. Looking at the under 65s at risk, we are at 45%, which is slightly above the Hampshire Isle of Wight average, so pretty good there, and well above our nearest city comparator. So again, practices are doing really well. And I know in the last couple of weeks, those figures have come right up. So practices are really working hard to get those at-risk groups to come in for their vaccinations, having prioritised initially the over 65s where the vaccine was more readily available. And then if we look at pregnant women, we've actually got the highest uptake across Hampshire and Isle of Wight at 43%. We know that practices may do some opportunistic lead, but also that Portsmouth hospitals are commissioned to do this up at the hospital when they see these pregnant ladies. So they've done a lot of good work on that as well. So overall, pretty positive picture. If I briefly look at the individual practice uptake, this is where it gets probably a bit more interesting. So if we just take a couple of areas, if we look at the age 65 and over, we've got quite a few practices that are above that 75% target already, some as high as 87, 78% I can see. But then we do have a couple of practices that are very low in comparison. So, I think the time has come where we will have some conversations with those practices just to see what challenges and barriers they may have and if they need any support to try and improve their figures in line with the other practices. And it's a similar thing with the at-risk patients. Some practices are really high at into the 50s and late 40%, and 2 or 3 practices looking a lot lower. And again, we just have those conversations to see what support they may need to try and help improve. But overall, looking pretty positive on the flu side of things. I just need to mention care homes because we had some data recently which suggested that uptake in care homes was looking on the low side. There was a bit of a time lag with the data, so we're hopeful that things have improved already since then. We're linking up with practices and also the care homes and local pharmacies just to see what improvements we can make over the next couple of weeks to get these patients vaccinated before the COVID vaccination programme starts in earnest. We're also having a bit of a push on healthcare workers. I didn't have any up-to-date data on that, but historically we've always been a little bit low in Portsmouth for healthcare workers uptake, so we're trying to have a bit of a push on that. Obviously it's personal choice, but we'll get some comms out around that over the next few days. And finally on the flu, we've got the over 50s coming on board from December. I think the idea being that some of these patients can get vaccinated before the real work starts with the COVID programme, which also, yes, may start in December, but more likely the bulk of that will be done in the new year and onwards from there. So that's where we are with the flu. I'll just pause there. I will move on to COVID shortly, but does anyone have any specific questions around the flu for now? Okay, and just briefly, I won't speak too much about COVID. As Simon says, things can change, the guidance can change almost on an hourly basis, let alone a daily basis. But I'm sure you've all seen probably the draft list of priority patients. So starting with the residents in care homes and the care home workers, then you have those over 80 and health and social care workers. And then it goes down in the age groups, so over 75s, 70s, over 65s. Then we get to the at-risk groups before we're back to the age groups again, so the over 60s, over 55s, etc. So we're just waiting for that to be finalised, I believe, the priority list. In terms of delivery, I think the idea is that we've got a large-scale vaccination site, at least one of those covering Hampshire and Isle of Wight. I'm aware that Portsmouth Local Authority are looking at potential sites as well if there's a support need there. And of course, we have our GP practices providing COVID vaccinations as well. They really will play a very important part in this. And they're doing that through their PCN groupings. So we've just had those sites approved. So if I just briefly run through those, we've got the Portsdown PCN will be using the Kingston Crescent site. We've got the Brunel network using Southsea Medical Centre. For Portsmouth North, they'll be using Cosham Health Centre. Portsmouth South will be using Eastleigh Health Centre. And then we have Island City Network using Lake Road Health Centre. So all of those sites have been agreed by NHS England, and we know the PCNs are making lots of preparations in readiness for starting the programme in earnest. So practices and PCNs well placed to deliver the vaccination programme, but we will continue dialogue with other partners such as our community provider, local pharmacy. I'm sure we'll have some input, but certainly practices will play a major part in the rollout of the vaccination. It will take a lot of resources, and so to that extent there will be a certain degree of reprioritisation of workload for practices, and I'll come on to that in the later agenda item. And as Nikki alluded to earlier, we have some financial schemes around some of this to help support the COVID vaccination programme, and high on that list will be additional resources to try and help practices with some of that. So we'll be working through that with practices next week on what that might look like. At that point, I think I'll just see whether Simon wants to add or clarify anything, and then we'll see if there's any questions. Justin.
You've probably covered a lot of it, Steve. So in terms of the mass vaccination site, there is a requirement for the STP geography to have at least one. The discussions are that there is our preferred option would be to have one in rural Hampshire, one for both of the city sites and one for the Isle of Wight. But there's obviously a timeline in stepping those up and finding an appropriate site, and all of the other ancillary thoughts around gritting routes, etc., and parking spaces to allow these to happen. It's also very it's reliant upon which vaccine we get out as well, and that's not been confirmed yet either. So it's dependent upon which one arrives and which one is more suitable for being delivered at PCN sites as opposed to the large-scale vaccination sites. So there's still lots of discussions going on. I think we are as well prepared as we can be with the knowns and the unknowns that we have at this stage, and we are looking at a 10-day notice period for when we have to step these up. So although we've previously been asked to be prepared and be ready for a potential start date of the 1st of December, that will inevitably slip because obviously we're within 10 days of that now anyway. So we are as advanced as we can. We know we'll have 10 days notice. The essential service, the final details, I believe, is going to be published today. I always hold those published dates with a slight pinch of salt, because that can delay, because basically they're under the same restrictions as we are in terms of what will be coming out and what won't be coming out. Lots of discussions around additional workforce and volunteers coming into this, and we've had discussions very brief discussions with the Hive around could there be a use of volunteers, etc. We've also had an offer from the council to approach them around any signage, etc., or anything around that support to the access to whichever these sites are, should they be needed. So we have offers coming in from everywhere. There's lots of parallel working, which means what we believe today might change tomorrow, depending on the working. So it's very much a case of putting everything that you can in place, but allowing yourself to be flexible, and relying upon that 10-day date to allow you to adapt to any last-minute changes. So I think we are as well as we can be. Practices and PCNs, I have to say, have really stepped up to this, and are, I wouldn't quite say chomping at the bit, but are very keen to take this on. And they are very practiced at delivering the flu programme each year, so they can go through a large number of patients in vaccination processes. Appreciate this is slightly different, and there will be some teething problems, I'm sure, but I think at this point I don't have any concerns that we're behind the curve on our preparedness.
Jackie, you have a question? Jackie, do you have a question? You have a hands up.
Sorry, it was a quick one. In terms of in the vulnerable high risk group, is that including our homeless population and say our BAME group?
There have been some questions around BAME, and that's been flagged back up. At the minute, there is no separate consideration for BAME, which is why we're asking that question for the nationally set criteria. There is a requirement to work with community providers to identify how we are going to vaccinate the homeless. That is, in this case, it's a really difficult question. It's so much easier if it is a single vaccine and a single dose. But with a transient homeless population where you are required to get that person to attend 21 or 28 days later and to have a record of which vaccine that patient had previously, because giving them a different vaccine, and at the point of actually setting this up, there are going to be multiple vaccines. It is a very difficult question how we're going to address some of these people, and it is on there. I'm not sure I've got all the answers for that one in a minute, Jackie, but it is in there that we have to start to pick up some of these homeless people, but I don't have a perfect answer that reassures me that I've got it nailed yet.
Thank you so much. It's the effort that's going into it as well as the consideration that I appreciate. We'll do our best.
Yeah.
Steve?
Yes, just to say, again, I don't have the perfect answer, but we do have a local practice in the city that provides a service to homeless patients. So I'm just in some discussions with them and also the local authority around not just the COVID vaccination, but to try and increase the flu vaccination uptake. So this practice goes out to the residential place where a lot of homeless patients go to. So there is maybe an opportunity to do something there. There are various logistical issues and contracting issues, etc., to overcome, but we're certainly on trying to look at that, Jackie.
Thank you. Very much appreciate that.
Any other questions, comments? Steve, do you have any comments to make? You've got hands up, sorry. Okay. Any other questions? Can I take that as no? Shall we move to prioritisation of workloads? Steve.
Yes, so as I mentioned earlier, we certainly recognise that practices are going to have to divert some resources for the COVID vaccination programme alongside doing flu and still trying to maintain cancer screening and child immunisation rates. It's a very tough ask of practice, really. So with that in mind, the CCG has agreed to apply some income protection to all of our locally commissioned services known as LCSs for the whole of this year, 2021. So that means that where activity levels are lower than the previous year, the CCG will ensure the practice is not penalised for this due to the impact of COVID. So we are going to ask practice to carry on continuing to report their activity to us each quarter. So in the unlikely event that the activity was higher for a particular service, we would honour that, but the reporting will also allow us to just monitor how practice is doing. So whilst we would certainly encourage some reprioritisation of resources, we also recognise that practices are open, patients can be seen face to face where appropriate, and that some of these services can't just stop, completely stop. So we're just keeping an eye on that. So if we take phlebotomy as an example, there could be a degree of prioritisation around some bloods, but certainly we wouldn't want practices sending lots of people up to the hospital, as that obviously wouldn't be the right thing to do. It's not something we expect would happen, to be perfectly honest, but it would open up a conversation with the practice if their activity levels really dropped off far more significantly than others, for example. What we're also going to do is just highlight within each LCS specification, which elements we feel are high priority and should continue, and which are potentially at least lower priority and could be paused. It's not something that's set in certainly ties in with the latest national guidance and kind of mirrors what's happened with the quality and outcomes framework this year as well, which I spoke about at the last meeting. So we will review the position for next year a bit nearer the time. I don't anticipate at this stage that the income protection would necessarily go into next year, but obviously very happy to review that when the time comes. And then just briefly moving on to the directed enhanced services known as the DESs. We certainly don't feel that we're able to protect the learning disability health check scheme. That's got a very high profile. We're still expected to hit our targets for that of 67% uptake for this year. So we're working with practices and PCNs around trying to maximise uptake. We've offered the support of the Solent learning disability nursing team. We've said that remote checks can be done where that is clinically appropriate, and we're still incentivising practices through our primary care sequin, and I think it's also covered in one of the QOF indicators as well. Extended hours is no longer DES in its own right, actually, it's just part of the PCN DES, but we've just given some guidance to practices and PCNs that we would certainly encourage and expect them to be able to use much of those extended hours for the COVID vaccination work and possibly the flu vaccinations as well. And then the only other one of significance really is the minor surgery scheme. And that one we have said we will protect income. We've heard anecdotally that some patients have not been wanting to come forward to have some sort of low level minor surgery done as they normally would. We know there's still a bit of a debate around some procedures, whether they're safe to do, and the activity levels are down on the usual years. So we're happy to income protect that, but keep an eye on the activity levels and listen out for any concerns that anyone may have, any patient complaints, etc., about not being able to be seen. But in all honesty, we know and trust that practices will continue to provide these services, but they have that peace of mind that the income is protected where necessary and that they can divert some of those resources for COVID work and flu vaccination work. So I think that's probably all I was going to say around that. Happy to listen to any questions or comments.
Any questions? Nikki, you have your hand up?
Yeah, thank you, Margaret. Just to add to that, the approach that the CCG's taken around sort of protecting income, except for those areas that we think are extremely sort of important through our clinical prioritisation, just to note that is being replicated through the local NHS England team, particularly around public health items like childhood vaccinations, etc. So whilst we are all looking at income protection, there's absolutely still areas that are particularly high profile that we're still anticipating are sort of based on activity delivered to ensure that they are prioritised throughout this period.
Thank you. Claire.
Thank you. Just for the committee to note that the LMC are grateful and content with this approach, so thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments? So on both the flu vaccinations, COVID vaccinations, and this workload prioritisation, we are asked to note that as a committee and will do so. Thank you. Okay, can we then move to any other business? And I know that Jo has an item of any other business. Do you want to take that forward, Jo?
Yes, Margaret. It's just to update this committee formally in the same way that we've updated the board through the Accountable Officer's report to the last board meeting around an issue relating to the Portsmouth Primary Care Alliance. So some of you may be aware through the board, but obviously we need to make this committee aware because of their responsibilities around commissioning the integrated primary care service. and I'll read what was in the Accountable Officer's report to the board. On the 28th of September 2020, the CCG was notified by the Portsmouth Primary Care Alliance, PPCA, that a financial loss had occurred from their bank account. Upon discovery, this was immediately reported to both the police and the NHS counter fraud investigation, and therefore, as an investigation is ongoing, neither the CCG nor PPCA can provide further details regarding the investigation at this time. The indication is that the investigation could take several weeks or months to come to conclusion, or before any potential charges are made relating to this. It's therefore that any subsequent trial is unlikely to take place before the spring-summer 2021. We will keep the committee updated as any new information is shared with us from the investigation team and any lessons learnt. The CCG have been working closely with both PPCA and their accountants, Maurice Crocker, to review the financial and operational position following this incident. And we have also involved our internal audit to undertake a financial review and audit of the financial processes within the organisation. We're confident, however, that this does not impact on PPCA's ability to continue to deliver primary care services within the city, and we have no significant concerns at this time regarding the operational or financial resilience of the organisation or their ability to respond to increased demand during the winter pressure or as a result of COVID. And we are, as a team, continuing to work closely with them to monitor that situation. And indeed, they've been involved in supporting a new service around the COVID at home pulse oximetry service. So it's just to be aware that this committee is to note this position. We will bring back further information as we have it. Thank you, Margaret.
Okay. Any questions or comments on that? Roger.
Yes, just Health Watch Portsmouth were approached by the local media to they were aware of this story, and we gave a no comment. But for any future things like this, if we hear about it first, who should we contact?
So I guess if it's specifically a comms issue, or if you're approached by the media, our comms lead, Cheryl Scott, who works for Portsmouth City Council and who covers Health and Care Portsmouth, would be the best person. But I can take that offline, Roger, and give you her details, and of course myself as well, if that would be helpful. So we can pick that up offline, so you've got her contacts.
All right,
thank you.
super, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? We're then asked to just note the position at the present time. Thank you. Thanks, Chair. Any other business? In the absence of any other business, I think we can close the meeting. Thank you very much. And we take the
Thanks, Margaret.
Thank
you, Margaret.
Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret.